It's actually a very, very widely cast audience, and a number of people, actually quite a lot of people, are in emerging markets, in countries that are still in development, like in Laos, in African states, Mozambique. So they obviously have, the case project like the Philippines is obviously very relevant for them and their environment, because these are countries that it's difficult to do business in, and project finance has its extra set of challenges. And one of the participants said that the fact that in a financial analysis you only look at the monetary returns, the money returns that a project has, is too limited, that you should also factor in, when you are assessing whether to go ahead with a project, whether to make an investment or not, they say you should also factor in things that don't generate money returns, which I think is a very good point. Obviously, we need development, we need education, we need poverty alleviation, we need less pollution. There are many, many factors that an investment can achieve that are not accessible in money. Let me see if I can get you a picture. See if this is something that you can see. What you should be seeing is 3 circles in the screen. And the innermost circle, the smallest circle, is the circle that we look at in financial analysis. It only looks at the financial returns, the money flows that a project generates. The circle outside that is a circle that expresses returns that a project can generate that can be expressed in money, but that they do not come in the form of money. Let's take an example. If you were to build a road, a motorway connection between 2 towns, then that would cut down on traffic congestion. It would reduce the number of hours driven or spent in traffic congestion, and that has a real financial value, because people can do more work, earn more for themselves and for their economy. So that is a return that is expressible in money. And then in the outer circle, you have returns that cannot be expressed in money because it's just they're too vague, like poverty alleviation or pollution. And what I have been showing is that in financial analysis, you look at the middle circle. You only look at what actual money flows come back to the project in assessing whether a project is financeable. And that is a very limited way of looking at it, but it is unfortunately the way that any private sector investor will look at, because even if there is a real financial impact from less traffic congestion, for example, the benefit of that goes to the public at large, to anyone who drives on the road, and not only to the investors. So the investors may put in money. Oops, here it is. The investors will put money into a project, and there may be lots of returns that flow into the economy and the country at large, but because they don't come back to the investors, they will be less inclined to look at them. They will only value them for a very limited extent. And that is why, realistically speaking, it makes it very difficult to do investments in projects that have only a public or a social return and no financial return. The only way that you could do that, well, actually, let me open up the stage. Who has an idea? Let's take the example of, we have a really smart Dutch student called Boyan Slat. He has developed a project, the Ocean Cleanup. It's a contraption that filters out the plastic soup from the oceans. It reduces the amount of plastic pollution. So let's assume that Boyan has achieved this successfully. He has had a prototype that achieves this, and he now wants to scale up, and he needs, say, $50 million or euros to finance the scale up of his project. That's clearly a benefit, but it's not a financial benefit as such, because, well, the fish that benefit don't pay for it. So has anyone got any idea how you would fund such a project? Okay, what you would probably need to do is you'd need to find social investors or government authorities that are willing to take zero returns or very low returns for their invested money in return for achieving the, in this case, the plastic soup being filtered from the sea. Still, it would be very difficult because the plastic soup is actually floating in the middle of the Pacific. There's not one country that is responsible for that part of the globe. So even getting a country to fund a project like that would be very difficult. So I think the thing to remember is that if a project can be brought back, do you mean, there's a question here. How do I get to that question? Did you mean a través de alianzas con los gobiernos? Sorry, Ingrid, I don't understand your question. My Spanish is decidedly rusty, if not non-existent. But there can be an alliance of governments maybe that funds that. But I guess the point I would like to make is that if a return... okay. I cannot see the... I can only see the Spanish part. Did you mean a través de alianzas con los gobiernos, through alliances with governments? Yes. Yes. Okay. You are suggesting that you fund this project through an alliance with a government, and that is correct. That would be one way to do it, because governments look more widely. They look at the outer circle as well. Still, for a plastic soup project, it would be difficult because there's not one government that is responsible for the pollution in the Pacific garbage patch in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. But still, the idea is, of course, a good one, that you need some public, government or NGO investor to help fund a project like that if you wanted to factor in the non-financial returns. So the conclusion, unfortunately, is that if a project has no financial returns and has only non-financial returns, that it would be very difficult to get a project like that to be funded through finance. In the project of Boyan Slat, what you could potentially do is you could maybe use the plastic that you get for nothing, that you filter out, if you can reuse that, if you can recycle that. And if you can sell that plastic, then of course you've got a money flow associated with that project, and that may be a basis for getting it financeable. That's all I had to say on this topic. Are there any questions or any things that were not clear that you would like me to expand on before I move on to the next question? Okay, not hearing it, not me, yeah, not from Ingrid. Okay, so then let's move on to the next topic. This is someone who is working for a construction company, and he has noted in the course that in project finance, you have a special purpose vehicle or a special purpose company that serves as the project entity. Someone else joined. Nadia, can you put your microphone to mute? And when you have a question or a comment, can you type it in the left bottom corner, and then we will cover that question with you. But welcome aboard, Nadia. So we have someone who's working for a construction company, and he sees that a project is always undertaken through a project company, an SPV, or a special purpose vehicle. And he's asking, why can that not be the construction company itself? Why do you need to have a separate company or a separate legal entity that undertakes the project? The answer to that is in the video section for the second video section in the course. It is to achieve a legal separation between the project and the construction company, because a project can be quite large, can be quite ambitious, and can be quite risky. And if something goes wrong with a project, for example, if you are building a new port area or a new road system, then if something goes wrong, that can pull down the whole construction company. The losses in the project can spread to the construction company and cause problems financially for the construction company. It's also possible that it goes the other way, that the construction company runs into financial difficulty where the project company is still in good form. And then you have a risk of cross-contamination, that the problems of one spread to the other. And by, just like you would have a fire door in a building, if a fire is in one section, you put a fire door to avoid the fire spreading. In a project financing, you would have a separate legal entity that serves as a fire door. It keeps everything that's in the project company inside, and everything that's outside the project company outside. That's called ring fencing, and that's done deliberately to reduce the risks of the construction company. So that's the reason why we have the two separate entities. We have the construction company itself, and we have the special purpose company that is undertaking the project. Is that a clear answer to that question? Does anyone have any comments or further questions on that topic before I move on to the next one? Okay, then. Yeah, okay, Ingrid is responding again, that so we can move on. So one of the students was struggling with the difference between an NPV, the net present value, and the IRR, the internal rate of return. He was saying, surely if a project has an IRR of 0, that means that you would do that project. But I think that's not, that would not be the case. If you have an NPV, a net present value of 0, then you would undertake a project, because it means that on a current value basis or on a present value basis, the money you stand to make on the project is equal to the money that you invest in the project and the funding cost of the project. So you are down $1,000 plus you have, say, $1,100 in funding cost, then at least you will be making $2,100, because so you are making as much money as you are investing. If you do it that way, someone would be inclined to invest. If a project has an IRR of 0, it means that the project is not making any return. So all the money that you put in, you are getting exactly that money back, but nothing more. And if you do that, then the money that you put into the project is costing you funding costs, and you're not making them good. So if you, in order to invest 1,000 in a project, you need to pay a funding cost of 5%. If the project makes you 0%, then you are not making back enough money. So no investor would undertake a project if the amount that if it has an IRR of 0. An IRR always needs to be positive for a project to have to be attractive, and how much positive it needs to be depends very much on the risk associated with the project. If you have a toll road for, say, the US or the Dutch government, which is a very safe, financially very safe government, then maybe a 4% return would still be enough. But if you are making an investment in a new port area in a remote area in Brazil or in Mozambique, you would probably be looking for a much higher return, because the funding cost, the cost of getting money to make that investment, is going to be much higher, because the investors will want to see a return that is in line with the risks that they run. And if the risk is higher, then the return will be higher. So therefore, an IRR always needs to be positive, and NPV can be zero before a project can get a go-ahead. And the difference, of course, is then the NPV is the present value of all cash flows, and the IRR is the actual return that the project is expected to generate. That's what I was going to say on the difference between an IRR and an NPV. Does anyone have any thoughts or questions on that topic? Okay. Then there was a question on how you estimate the costs and the revenues. We've seen in the course that in order to conduct your financial analysis, you need to make, at the time of your investment, an assessment of how much things are going to cost and how much returns the project is going to generate. And the more accurate your cost assessment is, the better, and the more accurate your income assessment is, the better it is. But in practice, of course, it's never, projects never run fully according to plan, and you have to make certain guesstimates on the cost, and you have to make certain guesstimates on the returns. And how do you deal with that in a project financing? Well, one way you deal with that is you build a project up gradually as you get more serious about undertaking the project. You get more accurate in your analysis of what the situation is. So in the first phase of a project, when you're just doing what they call a feasibility study, an initial study, you may make certain guesstimates on cost levels and revenue levels that may be still rather inaccurate. But then if you find as a result of a feasibility study that it's looking likely that this project is a good project and you want to undertake it, then you have to ask for real quotations, you have to ask for a real assessment of these cash flows, and you gradually work towards a more and more accurate model. And it's still never going to be fully accurate, because as soon as you've made the investment, as soon as the project is up and running, things will happen. Market rates may move, currency rates may move, and how you deal with that is essentially, that's what you use your financial model for. You've seen the section on the financial model, that the model is essentially a very patient tool that you can plug any new factor in, and the model will tell you exactly what the financial impact of that change is. So if you find that the building overruns by half a year or a year, the model will calculate what the present value impact of this delay is. If the model tells you that the currency has moved and that people are paying a smaller amount because of a lower currency, the model again will calculate exactly what the impact of that is. So you use the model on an ongoing basis in the project to, whenever you have a new insight on a new cost or a new revenue, you will input that, and that will give you a good insight as things move, what the impact of that is. and that will enable you to take the right measures. A measure could be that you try and you need to find a new solution for or a new investment that is cheaper, or you need to find a new source of buyers for the project revenues. You may need to hedge your currency risk. You may need to find cheaper loans. There may be all sorts of solutions that you can risk manage. We looked at that in the risk management section, the steps that you can take, and you may need to reevaluate those as the project progresses and as new factors come up. So it doesn't really matter that you can't be 100% sure that everything is going to happen exactly to plan. You just need to have a tool to hand that can deal with any changes and can calculate what the impact of any changes are. And that's really what the financial model is all about. And that's why that, I guess, is the key tool to any project financing. It's the thing that all investors and all lenders will look at on an ongoing basis. Every year you'll be asked to give them an update of the model so that they can see exactly what your new insights are and how that impacts their loans. So any more questions or thoughts on that topic? Okay. The next question is from someone who works in a project management and is looking at project financing from the point of view of what a project manager does, which is exactly what the course was designed for. And he has found that in project management, you are more and more looking to manage a project using the agile methodology. Are you all familiar with agile? What that means?
No.
Okay. Agile essentially means that instead of designing the whole project from the very beginning to the very end in one very complete and static plan, you cut the project down into different stages, and each stage you do a limited part of the project, and at the end of that stage you see where that has brought you, and then you decide what the best next stage is. And essentially you're building a project step by step, and each time you are taking the experiences from an earlier stage and you are using them to perfect the next stage of a project. Agility is an English word. It means movability, or that you are movable. A project is movable. And the reason they are developing this is because big complex projects, once something goes wrong, and if everything has been cast in stone, if everything has been fixed, then it makes it very difficult to respond to a new event, and that makes conducting a project in a very fast-moving environment very difficult. So that's why they've developed this agile methodology.
And the agile methodology is how can I relate the agile methodology with the Prince2? Because I have done Prince2 Foundation.
Yeah, Prince2. I'm not a project management specialist, but I think Prince2 is essentially folded into the or agile is folded into the Prince2 methodology more and more. I think in Prince2 is trying to give a structure for the movability or the agility that a project needs to have. Now the movability or this agility, the fact that there are changes that are going to take place as we move along in a project management, and the fact that the outcome may change as time goes by, that is a methodology that is very unsettling to a financier. A financier wants to know when he sends you the first money, what's going to happen with the money. he wants you to have a plan. He wants you to know exactly what you're going to use the money for. He's going to limit you to spending the money only on the things that you've said you are. He doesn't like a change in the plan, because a change in the plan creates an extra risk for him, and he doesn't like risk because then he doesn't know whether he's going to get his money back. So as a basic principle, an agile methodology doesn't sit very well and doesn't sit very easily with a project financing. There are ways in which you can tailor a project financing to give you the room to make the changes, and that is through a set of what they call waiver requests. A waiver essentially means that you ask a lender to give away a certain right that he has. So let's say that you are developing a road, and you've designed it, and you've given the financier has given you approval to build the road exactly as you planned it, but that as you are moving along, a new kind of road surfacing comes available that is much cheaper, or that is that has a longer useful life, or that is safer. So there's some kind of a technical development that was not available at the time that the project financing was organized. Then the project sponsor will want to adopt that new methodology, will want to adopt that change, and the project documentation will tell him he cannot. And then he can go to the investor, and he will need to get the investor's permission to change the scope of the project loans and the project documents, essentially to give him to agree for him to make the improvement. And if an agile change is an improvement, and you can demonstrate that it is an improvement, then any investor would welcome the change. I think where it gets tricky is if a change is not really clear whether it's a positive or a negative change, and particularly negative changes investors and lenders will not like at all, because it will, as I said, it will increase their risk and create uncertainties that they don't know how to deal with. Yeah, so overall, an agile, flexible project management methodology does not sit very easily with project finance. You try to do the opposite. You try to make everything as robust and as fixed as possible, but through open communication lines between the project and the investors and financiers, they will be able to get waivers, usually for changes that are, real improvements.
Okay, good. Thanks.
You're welcome, Nadia. Any more questions or comments on this? Okay. Before I move on to the next question, let's because I've been doing a lot of talking. Are there any questions that you have that you would like me to cover? I would say that, given that you are on the call and other participants are not, you should have the first right to field any questions that you may have. So maybe take a minute to just think about a question or a topic that you would like me to cover again to make it more clear.
At the moment, I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. Question related to IRR. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know when, Nadia, if you were already on the call when I covered this topic. In some, yeah. Okay. I think that they just happen to be the same questions, I think. Okay, so we have a question. I think you can all see the question. So this is a question from Ingrid, that in some developing countries where there's a high risk for investment in a project, the internal rate of return needs to be very high. And that is correct. Investors will only invest if the rate of return that they can expect is in line with the risk that they are running. And if you are making an investment in a country like Mozambique, where the risk is higher than in, say, the UK, then the returns that the investors will expect will also be higher. It is necessary to work hard to mitigate the risk in such a way that the IRR is smaller but attractive for investors. I mention it because if it is not done, the country runs the risk of staying in its state of falling behind. Yes, this is very true. And to me, this is one of the essences, Ingrid, of doing a project in developing countries. And that's precisely why I have used the Philippines power station as the case project. Because Philippines as a country is what it is. No one can change its risk profile. No one can change the way that foreign investors look at it. So if any investment in Philippines want to attract money, it's going to have to pay a return that is in line with that risk profile. So a project would have to generate maybe 20% or 15 to 20% just to be able to get the money to make the investment. And not many projects can generate those high returns, particularly not if they are in a developing country where the salary levels, the income levels are low, because you may be selling water to poor people, or you may be selling power, electricity to poor people, and they can't pay really high rates because they don't have the money to. So you're in a squeeze between, on the one hand, a low level of income potential because of the low incomes and a high cost base. And precisely as you say, the only way to bridge this gap is to be really, really careful about your risk management. The more successful you are in reducing certain risks, the better it is for the investors, and the better rates of funding they will be giving you. So let me give you an example of this. One of the risks that is really difficult in a country is the political risk. Countries can be less stable, and they may have a political environment where things change. Once you've made an investment, and that investment has an earn back period of 20-25 years, it's very difficult to, you can't just take up the project and go. Once it's been built, it's been built. So that makes the political risk a really tricky risk to manage. Can you think of ways to mitigate this political risk? Okay, one way that is often applied is by joint venturing with a foreign government or with an international organization like the World Bank or the Asia Development Bank or the African Development Bank. When you have an international organization that is one of your investors or has lent money to a project, it gives an international organization an interest in that project remaining successful. And it also makes it them have an interest in avoiding that political changes happen. So if there were a new government or a new authority that wants to change the legal environment or the political environment and wants to revoke certain concessions that you have been awarded, or that wants to interfere with the prices that you can charge to the public, then still you're in their country and they can do whatever they like. But if your project is funded by the World Bank, and if as a result of their actions they cause the World Bank to lose money, that's not a very good fact pattern for a political leader in a developing country to upset and make angry the World Bank. So that's one of the reasons why a lot of projects in developing markets are undertaken together with an international organization. It serves as a kind of a hedge, a kind of a protection against undue interference. Ingrid, did this answer your question? Yeah, okay. Nadia, you said this is interesting. It sounds like you're in a similar kind of environment. There's another way that you can solve this, and this is one where the Netherlands is actually the country I live in, is a very attractive country. We have a very good network of investment protection treaties. These are international treaties that the Netherlands concludes with all sorts of emerging markets all over the world. And essentially in these treaties, countries promise to protect each other's investments. So if a Dutch company makes an investment, say in the Philippines, then if they interfere, the Dutch investor can take the Philippines government to an international arbitration court in New York. And that's in theory, that's a very powerful protection, because if you have to go to a local court system and you are fighting the local government, the court is likely to side with the local government. But if the decision comes from an international organization that is based in the US, then that's another reason why, that's another way to get some sort of protection against political interference. Any other questions that you would like me to address? Okay, keep them coming if you think of them. In the meantime, I will continue with another question that came out of the course. It relates to inflation. In the case exchange rate hedging. Okay. Let me stick to inflation for a moment, and then we'll deal with exchange rate hedging. Which actually is the trickiest one of all. So I'll save that for last. Inflation essentially, I think means that the cost of living goes up, and in countries that are financially not very strong, you tend to have high levels of inflation, and the inflation can go up or down rapidly. Like in some, I looked at this for Mozambique, and it has an inflation rate of 18% at the moment. So it means that every year prices go up by 18%. When you have a project, you tend to be spending money in the early years to make the investment, to make the power plant, or build the road, or build the water plant. So you've got cash outflows initially, and then you've got cash inflows coming in the years after that. So if there is inflation, it means that the cost of your investment is going to go up. But if all that cost is in the first 2 years, the inflation impact is not doesn't necessarily have to be that bad, particularly if you've succeeded in getting contracts with fixed prices. On the other hand, if you are selling electricity, or if you are selling water, or you are selling toll tickets to a road, then if there is price rises, if there's inflation, then those prices may be going up as time goes by. So inflation tends to be, a high level of inflation actually tends to be more helpful in a project, because it gives extra revenues, and the revenues go up as time goes by. So inflation doesn't tend to be a big problem unless you have a contract that is fixed, where the price is, you have an offtake agreement where someone buys your projects, your services or your products like water or electricity at a fixed price. If that's the kind of contract you have, then if there's inflation, then you're going to get cheaper and cheaper relatively to other providers, and that would be very that would not be very attractive, and that's why you never see that. In all the contracts I've seen, there's always an indexation clause, essentially a clause that says that the prices will move up or down as inflation moves up or down. Okay. Nadia asks an interesting and a tricky one relating to exchange rates. Exchange rates essentially means that the rate of your of one currency relative to another moves. So if today we can buy £1 in the UK for €1.30, maybe tomorrow it will be 1.20 or 1.40. So the relative rates from one currency to the other, they continually move, and this can be a problem if your costs are in one currency and your revenues are in another currency. So if you make an investment in a power plant in US dollars and you are selling electricity in Philippines currency, then a movement from one currency to the other can have a huge impact. And how do we manage that? The easiest way to manage that is to have the currency that you have your cash outflows in the same currency as the currency that you have your cash inflows in. So if you are earning money in Philippine pesos, the best way to avoid having a currency exchange rate is to make your investment in Philippine pesos. That's not going to be very easy if the project needs to buy lots of components from abroad. If there has to be a US turbine or a US road construction crane, then often it'll be charged in dollars rather than in Philippine pesos. So what it argues for doing is to try and reduce to try and increase the local component of all your expenditure as best you can to the local environment, which has a double benefit also, that it also means that the profit from making the project ends up in the Philippines, because they are the ones who are providing the construction, or they are providing the services. So I'd say the easiest way to mitigate this risk is to try and have as much local sourcing of your project's returns. It would be that you charge for your project in foreign currency, so you would be selling electricity or water in, say, US dollars, but that's a very tricky strategy we found in across the world, because in most countries that are poor, their own currency really drops against the dollar really rapidly as the years go by, and that means that the price of your electricity can go through the roof and makes it politically and commercially very difficult to sell your project, your product. Sorry. That's for the rest. You have financial products that allow you to hedge currency risks. They are called currency swaps or currency forwards. That's a theoretical option. It's a real option if you have major currencies. If you're doing a project in developed countries, then there are all sorts of projects like that. But as far as I'm aware, there's not often a financial market for currency swaps in Philippine pesos or in the more exotic currencies. So it's more a theoretical option than a practical option, I have to say. Okay. Anything else on this topic? Okay, let me move to one last. Yeah, the last question is quite a specific question, but it's actually it's useful to address it anyway. If as a government you are deciding to give a concession for a certain project like a road or a power station, you ask for a tender from a number of different to say how much would you charge me if I gave you the concession to build this project, and then you would likely like to go with the cheapest, the one that gives you the lowest price. Now, in practice, when you are developing a project, you want to be cautious. You want to estimate very carefully, because once you spend the money, you can't go back. So the practice, and I think rightly, is to estimate the costs and to underestimate the potential revenues, because if you do it the other way around, you may end up going into financial trouble and the project then cannot deliver. So that is a reason why often when the price is quoted for a concession, that these who tender for the concession are very conservative, and then when they get the deal, they build, and then the costs end up being lower, or the revenues end up being much higher. You can see that if say you are building a road that connects a harbor port in say Mozambique with a harbor, that road, once it's there, can generate a lot of economic activity, and maybe you are estimating only a low number of users and a low toll fee, but then when the road is built, actually the toll fee is much higher. So once you've locked into a concession and this happens, it could be that the private companies earn much more money than they were expecting, or that the government was expecting to earn, and that can be politically very sensitive if the public is becoming aware that foreign investors are essentially earning too much money. So the way that you would deal that, and I think that's happening more and more, is that there are clauses in the concession agreement that essentially say that you can earn a certain return, a certain IRR, that is agreed to be a reasonable return, but that if the concession ends up being too profitable and your IRR is higher than you expected because the whole situation ends up better than you expected, then that may be a reason to reset the concession fee. So essentially you get paid less as a foreign contractor. And that way you create a mechanism that you can't earn super profits. Question, of course, is also what happens if it goes the other way. If the road is not as successful, the number of users is lower, and then you would obviously have to reset the concession payment in the other direction. Those are mechanisms that are often used, particularly in countries where they have a lot of experience with project financing. That concludes all the questions that I had. Does anyone have any other topics or questions that they would like me to address? Okay, then I would suggest that we round off. Once again, I thank you for joining this webinar. It's been a pleasure to present to you, to get some faces and to be able to communicate with you, because obviously the online platform is not as personable as having you in the classroom or in the university. May I just ask, Nadia, which country are you in? And Ingrid, which country are you in?
Hi, Emilia. I live in the Netherlands.
You live in the Netherlands. Okay.
I live in the Netherlands.
Okay.
And I used to work in Shell.
Okay.
The communications department. And at the moment, I'm looking for opportunities on the space industry.
Okay.
So that is one of the reasons I'm following this training, and I might have some particular questions related to space projects and financing space projects that maybe this call will be not much interesting for everybody else about the space. But I would like to ask you if it's possible, if I can send you an email with all my questions. I will try to be as concise as possible.
Yeah, if we can agree that it's concise, then I'm happy to think along with you. Yes, that's great.
Thank you.
And Ingrid, I saw that you are in Colombia. Okay, and Kyla, well, you and I know each other. I know you're in the Netherlands, and Liz, I know you're in the Netherlands as well. So we have mostly Netherlands participants tonight. Okay, once again, thank you for your attention. Thanks for participating in the course. I hope you enjoy it. I would welcome your feedback if you think there are things that could be clearer or improved. I'm happy to look at those. But other than that, I'm glad that I was able to do this webinar with you, and I'm really happy that you can participate in the course. Thank you all. Liz, is there anything else we should be doing? Okay, excellent. Okay, well, thank you all, and chat some other time. And good luck with completing all the assignments and and completing the course. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.